Drivers, start your engines!
Hit the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other damn thing out there. I want you to be perfect.
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. It's him. He talks to me.
Well, I wanna be a race car driver. Pretty girls eating from my hand, yeah. Wanna live a life of fun and danger. No sweater working for the man, alright. Well, I wanna be a firefighter. Cool-headed when the heat is on, yeah. Save a baby from the burning building. Take her home with the sprinklers on, alright.
No, he didn't slam you, he didn't bump you, he didn't nudge you. He rubbed you. And rubbing, son, is racing.
Hey race fans, welcome to the Whoobazoo Radio Network. Welcome to Drafting the Circuits. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour as we discuss everything racing. Joining me in the studio tonight, Mr. Gray Warren from Richard Childress Racing, Mr. Richard Youden, race engineer, journalist with Indycar.com and Motorsports Tribune, Joey Barnes, and NASCAR correspondent Seth Eggerl. How is everybody doing this evening?
Terrific. Very good, thank you.
All right, great to have you all here to listen. So that big attention-grabbing sport of NFL football is now behind us, which means auto racing can take center stage, in our minds at least. But so we've seen NASCAR on the track for the first time this past weekend. We've got the Indycars were out in Phoenix testing for several days. All the teams there. We've got all the lineup set, some new team alignments there, rookie drivers in the car for the first time. A lot of exciting stuff going on there. But let's talk about that IndyCar test out there. And Joey, you spent the better part of a couple of days out there, right there on the track, reporting for Indycar.com on the test there, and a lot to see. The new car is exciting. We saw again rookie drivers in their first seat time with their new teams, and one of the more compelling things I thought, on top of everything else, including the first test of the windscreen, was a lot of new names on the sides of the car. Which when I say that, I mean new sponsors into the sport this year. I mean, we saw U.S. Concrete on Marco Andretti's car, PaySafe on the Dale Coyne entry. Scott Dixon showed off a brand new PNC Bank livery. Sealmaster is on the other Coyne car there. Binderholtz on the Juncos car. So some new names there. It's pretty encouraging that we're seeing some new sponsors coming into the sport. So, but with that being said, Joey, you were out there. What are your impressions after seeing the cars on that 1 mile oval during the day and under the lights?
Yeah, so they had the rookie test on Thursday, and then Mateus Slice did a good job leading everybody on that one. It was a refresher for a few others, like Gabby Chavez and Spencer Pigot, since Spencer Pigot has never actually ran on an oval like ISM, and followed into Friday and Saturday. It was actually a sweep across all four sessions of Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan. There was a total of over 6,000 laps logged throughout the combined sessions. Takuma Sato ended up taking 3 of the sessions. It was remarkable the pace that they had out of the Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan group. He obviously is getting on pretty well. And, if I'm looking over the combined times, you've got Sato at the top spot. And, he averaged, the best lap out of that was 189.855, quite a bit off of pole speed that we saw last year. The pole speed, obviously in a different aero package, was up there nearing the 195 mark. So, I don't know whenever we come back in April if we're going to see those kind of times approach that. I think we're going to break the 190 mark. But, overall, this package did produce less of the follow the leader and a little bit more of compelling passing that we saw. They were lifting going into 1. We saw some bottlenecking going up around the dog leg. We saw some passing in 3 and coming off of 4. So good passing zones that were starting to develop as practice wore on or as the test session wore on. But anyway, behind Sato, we had Will Power, Tony Kanaan in his first go with AJ Foyt Racing, and then the champ Joseph Newgarden's in fourth, and Graham Rahal, the other Rahal Letterman Lanigan guy, put down the best lap that was fifth best on the timesheets. Marco Andretti, Alexander Rossi for Andretti Autosport, 6-7. Scott Dixon was 8th, and the compelling thing with Dixon was the final hour of testing on Saturday night, he actually put it in the fence. Broken right suspension piece. Essentially, he said that the Andretti guys got by him. He eased out of the throttle, was trying to put power down. They were just on a fuel run, and just lost it. No severe damage from the looks of the tub or anything like that. Maybe some wing replacements. So it's kind of interesting to see the dynamics that when you have a 4-time champ like Scott Dixon run into some troubles trying to find the way with the new package. Behind him was Simon Pagenaud, and then rounding out the top 10 was Hunter Ray. Matthias Leist is somebody I'd like to touch on because, he's a rookie, he's quick. We saw what he did at Carlin last year for Indy Lights, and he comes in here, he leads the rookie session. AJ Foyt pulled him aside on Thursday and just told him how proud of him he was, trying to learn pit stops, coming off to the warm-up lane, things like that. He had 4 separate shunts over the course of the 2-day session. So he spun once, and he had a couple of close run-ins with the wall. One of those was almost inclusive of teammate Tony Kanaan. But, overall, I like what I see personally because I see him actually testing that limit. And I think we all know that sometimes rookies come in and they're not smooth, and sometimes they're too erratic and they wreck all over the place, or they're bad fast and they are pushing that limit. And I think he's definitely the guy that's trying to push that limit, and I think we're going to see some good things out of him this year based on what I saw in testing, based off of his makeup and the fact that he's got a pretty good mentor there in Kanaan. Pietro Fittipaldi, grandson of Emerson Fittipaldi, he ends up 15th best on the timesheets. He's actually going to be in the car for part of the season, and I'm excited to see what he can do. Pretty solid out of the gate. He's going to be running Phoenix in the second race of the year in April. And then just to kind of touch on some of the other noobs to the test, Carlin Racing finished 18th and 19th in testing. It's not necessarily indicative. Once again, testing is not indicative of what we're going to see come the actual race in April. But overall, you got to like what you see with the new car, with what it presents, different things like that. I think we're going to see a hell of a show when we come back in April. So, and among the things that were pretty new and in development was the cockpit aeroscreen that was getting tested. Scott Dixon came out there on Thursday. They put PPG designed a different aeroscreen, and they went out there and tested it. Pretty much covers the entire flexion of the driver's helmet, and we're seeing something that when he went out there, he said there wasn't a whole lot of difference in drivability of the car, that it was more towards somebody's doing something. It was more towards just having to get used to everything. So, trying to get used to a little bit of depth. He did say that the glare from the sun, because Phoenix, as you know, you come down the front stretch, the glare from the sun can just be terrible, and it can be blinding. That mixed in with the lights and a few other things, he said that was actually reduced quite a bit, so you could actually see the track a little bit better, but it was a little bit warmer because there was no airflow coming in the cockpit, and it was quieter. It was quite a bit quieter. So he said those were some subtleties to get used to. I would encourage everybody to just know that this is the first tryout of this thing. So this isn't something that we're going to slap together and put on at St. Pete. At least that's my point of view. I don't know that for a fact. I think we're probably another year away. I think there's going to be a few more trials. They're going to find a few new ways to help airflow and a few other things like that. So,
and I did.
Overall, I think it's a good thing.
I did hear that the next phase was going to be more impact testing. With it. I mean, they know that's a pretty strong polymer they have there, but they're going to subject that to various impacts coming at different angles just to see how it holds up. But all in all, I mean, there is, and it's on YouTube if you want to watch it, the visor cam video of Scott Dixon testing that thing, and it's quite apparent that it actually looking through the windscreen actually reduces the glare, and it's apparent in the video if you look at the track lights outside and then look at them through the windscreen. It actually looks like it's giving the drivers a bit of a better view. Now, how long that thing will stay clean and how easy it's going to be to keep clean, or if we're going to use tear-offs or not, that all remains to be seen. But I do believe that it was a good positive first test, and aesthetically it looks quite a lot better than what they're putting on Formula One cars these days.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at something that had pop rivets in. They were kind of putting it on there, kind of like a fighter jet canopy. They wanted to make sure they could try it out on an oval first. There's still the question about tear-offs. There's a question about rain whenever we go to road courses. Scott Dixon was a little hesitant about what it could do on a road course necessarily, because it's an inch thick at least. So it's got some good thickness, and you got to wonder, whenever you're turning in on elevation corners at a place like Mid-Ohio, what is that going to do to change where you see things, where the cutoff is. So there's still some things to be worked out, but overall I'd say it's a really positive step forward. So I liked everything I saw out of the test. So I think we're in for a treat this season.
Yeah, and another bit of news coming out of Phoenix, and Gray, I'll let you go next, but I just wanted to point out that I'm pretty excited that Jimmy and Sully, that being Jimmy Vassar and James Sullivan, are back in the sport. Those were the guys behind the KVSH Racing, ran a successful campaign, won the Indy 500 in 2013 with Tony Kanaan. They left the sport a year before last, but they're back in a partnership with Dale Coyne, now called Dale Coyne Racing with Vassar Sullivan. But great to see those guys back in the sport and back on the grid. Those are two guys who racing's in their blood, and they've been part of the sport for a long time. So now Gray, you had a comment?
No, I think that was Richard. Richard had a point to make.
Oh, okay, Richard, go right ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to on the sort of visor that IndyCar have been putting on. Of course, it's obviously going to draw comparisons to the Halo device that Formula One is going to be implementing this year. And I was just wondering, Joe, if you had any numbers on sort of if they've done any impact testing. I know you said that's an area they've got to develop now, but if they've got any sort of real numbers, because the numbers coming out of the Formula One world of some of the loads that that Halo is taking, it's in the sort of 25,000 pounds plus load range that this Halo is designed to withstand, and it will have to, the teams when they develop it will have to, prove that to the FIA and it passed those marks to be certified. But I mean, that's an incredible load. It'd be interesting to see how that Perspex screen can withhandle it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. To answer the first part of that question, I do not have any numbers. Those are things that are still yet to be known to me. I can tell you this, as far as what Dixon told me, is I expected personally to see, because let's be honest, the deflection, the angle of that windshield the windscreen is pretty steep. So I expected whenever the wind hits that you're not going to get as much air put on that rear wing. Mm-hmm. He said there's not a lot of difference in feel. He said we already knew where the CFD was, and because of that, it doesn't really have a lot of difference in feel. There's not a difference in airflow. The numbers from the wind tunnel were just a few pounds, according to what he said. So as far as what it does to the handling of the car, it doesn't seem to affect it a lot. And you would feel it at a place like Phoenix compared to a number of other places. So that's encouraging. Here's my one thing, numbers be damned, about the whole F1 Halo thing. First part is, I love the fact that IndyCar took their time to go through the process, and that a company, not necessarily an outside company per se, because we all know PPG has been involved in IndyCar racing for a long time, but a company that's not a team is the one that was behind designing this, and they came together with the teams to kind of put this thing together. It wasn't the teams individually coming up with something like Ferrari and Red Bull, etc. And so you found something that kind of is unified, that fits everything. That said, Halo sounds great with the amounts of numbers that it can withstand and different things like that. And yes, of course, cars can move around, cars can roll and land on other cars and that. We haven't seen that in F1 in quite a while. That said, and it can withstand a tire. My argument to the Halo is the spring at Hungaroring that ended up hitting Massa hit him at an angle that would have probably gone right in that gap. And there is a section of gap on that Halo in which, debris can hit the driver still. So you want to deflect tires and big objects. That's great. The big thing about this is protecting the driver from debris in general and deflecting it. So it's great that it can withstand all this energy. The biggest thing to me is, can it deflect the energy? Because that's what's going to be the difference in helping keep the driver safe. And I'm a little reserved about the Halo. Yes, aesthetically it sucks, but beyond that, as far as a safety standpoint, I don't like the fact that it's still open for the driver to potentially get hit with debris. So,
it's interesting to see what Dixon thinks about the that shield in terms of, because when you've got that windshield like that, for whatever better word from a counter argument against it is, it's always in your field of vision. It's always going to cause some sort of distortion, especially on a piece of Perspex or acrylic or whatever material it's made of that thick. As you say, it's an inch thick. I mean, that's going to distort the driver's vision at some point throughout the, at all times. Whereas with the Halo, if you're looking in the distance, one sliver that thin so close to you, you're probably not going to notice. Field way. It's like a bit like in NASCAR. They've got the, the retention or the reinforcement strips in the front of the windshield. The drivers never see it because they're looking, so much further forward into the distance. But you're true in the fact that, with the Halo, bits can get through there. I'm just wondering if the concern with the with that Perspex shield is the distortion and the visual distortion. I mean, it's all right. Very quickly, was Dixon, when he was testing that, were there other cars on track, and was he racing close with those cars? Would it affect his depth perception at all?
I mean, he was just doing solo runs, and from what I had heard from him, everything was positive. He said it just said it took a little bit to get used to. So it was just a matter of, he said everything felt fine. It helped reduce the glare. He didn't have a problem finding his marks to get into the corner and things like that. I mean, obviously the kicker here is he hadn't necessarily been on track at Phoenix. I mean, I think they had the manufacturer test there that he was a part of, but collectively he hasn't been there in this kind of capacity at Phoenix to try to find his points at the beginning of the year. This is the first oval test. So that you have a new car combined with a new shield and things like that, so you're trying to find your breaking points anyway. But as far as traditional points, there was no distortion, impact, things like that. It's just a matter of getting used to something there. I would say that this kind of reminds me, obviously it's a little bit bigger than what we had back in the day of the early 90s and the 80s and so on and so forth with a slight windscreen. That was almost irrelevant in some cases. But I do think that, that took some getting used to for drivers back in the day. And I think that if we start implementing this in junior Formula Series, junior categories, with like the Mazda Road Indy, people are going to learn how to train with this. People are going to learn how to build with this and drive with it and so on and so forth. And so it's just going to become an impasse. People are going to get used to it, and it's not going to be a big deal.
Do you know the company that's producing these shields?
PPG.
Okay. And, with the technology that they've developed now with that stuff, back in the day, you'd have trouble with something that thick being almost like, refracting light, almost like a prism because of that thickness. I'm sure they've developed something here that's pretty distortion-free for those guys.
Yeah, there was no prism effect from what he said, because that was one of the questions asked. There was no prism effect. There was nothing to that effect at all. So there's still a long way to go in this process, but I would say it was a pretty positive first go. It's a matter of now, do we make it a little thinner? What can it sustain as far as impact protection and things like that? And how can we modify this for tear-offs, for weather? Obviously, there's a variety of different elements that we can use on the windscreen itself to deflect rain, because when you're going 100 plus miles an hour on a road course, rain's going to fly anyway off the windshield, but it's a matter of, you can't just throw Rain-X on something and hope it works. So it's a matter of trying to make everything situated and perfect for each discipline that IndyCar goes to.
I would imagine some of the same technology we use in NASCAR for the tear-offs that we use. That stuff has gotten better and better as we go along. It's very clear. You can layer it, put up to as many as 7 to 10 layers of it where it can be pulled off on pit stops.
Yeah, I think and one of the final points on this that I could make is this is the first thing that went on track, but they were doing simulations, in the shop, on the computer, things like that. And they actually, when you look at the windscreen, if people go and check out some of the images of it, they notice that it goes, up the front of the tub, and then it goes all the way down the sides to the engine cover behind the driver. That was actually not the original design. The original design was only going to go halfway back. And, they made, some of the drivers, Dixon in particular, made comments that it was one of those things where it kind of cut just a little bit of that vision. There's just that little bit of which it could affect what you do and how you move and things like that, just because of your reaction to see things. So they made it go all the way back for things like that. So still a long way to go, but, they're making the right strides.
Yeah, no doubt that IndyCar is doing it right, taking their time with it. So, Joey, let's talk about some of the teams that were closer to the bottom of the order. Now, we saw that the newer teams had received their chassis a bit later, like we talked, Carlin and the Yukos were kind of down there closer to the bottom of the order. But again, the goal of this test is not to set a fast time, but to learn the car, obviously, and have your newer drivers learn the car as well. But I was a little surprised that Schmidt-Peterson Racing in particular, Hinchcliffe was down there next to last on the speed chart. Wickens was a few positions ahead. So any trouble in paradise over there at Schmidt-Peterson, or is it just that they're learning the car and not going after the fast time? Any feedback?
I would like to think that they're learning the car. That said, I'm glad you brought this up because I actually forgot to bring it up earlier. That final hour of Saturday session in the evening got pretty frantic. It's where we saw a lot of the action. Groups were going out there, 4, 5, 6 cars. And constantly you see a car get a run off of 2, and they go to make a move coming down off of 2, and they got sharply cut off. Well, 3 or 4 laps in a row, it was Wickens who was the guy doing the cutting off going into the dogleg, and it was a considerably slower pace, the best way I can put it. There's other words I could use, but for the sake of the cleanness of the show, it was dogged on how slow it was. So he's still trying to learn. Obviously, it was the first time that he was in an environment on an oval. He was kind of stunned by different things like learning how to be within 3% of Hinchcliffe's throttle response, because Hinchcliffe came in on rookie day and shook down the car for him, and they talked to Wickens afterwards and said, be within 3% of the throttle of what Hinch was, and he's like, how do you feel 3% in your foot? So he's still trying to get acclimated, learning those little nuances while he's also trying to race inches away from his rivals. So I think it's one of those things where he's got a long ways to go. And let's be honest, when you think about oval specialist, Hinchcliffe is not the first one that is at the top of your timesheets. So, I think that when you look at guys like Hinch, he's solid. He can do the job. I think about Texas. If the setup's right, he can definitely do the job. But overall, they're trying to get reacclimated to their program. And I would also stress that they brought in a lot of new people that are also trying to get acclimated to teams, some people from Ganassi and other organizations. And so I think that's also part of it, is them just trying to get instilled. That said, I'm a little shocked to find where their pace was and where a team like Carlin sat. And Carlin, this is their first natural oval test. They tested on Sebring and the Homestead Road course for a shakedown. They said that the only thing they've encountered was like 15 or 20 minutes of downtime due to IT issues, which every team was plagued by a little bit of computer issues. So they've really got some positive things moving in the right direction. And Max Chilton was saying he expects by the month of May that they could be in attack mode. Charlie Kimball thinks quietly it could be before that. And Trevor Carlin just does what Trevor Carlin does. He just says, look, we just want to be credible. We want to build this thing step by step. We have no illusions. We're not going to come in and shake the tree of Penske or Ganassi or guys like that right out of the gate. We just got to come in and do our job, know we do our job. Stunningly, he said 80% of the team that right now is on the IndyCar side, 80% of it's actually his lights team. So it's encouraging to see that it's not just drivers that can move up from Indy Lights to IndyCar, that it also translates with the mechanics and the engineers and things like that. So he said that 2 engineers roughly on Indy Lights. He's looking at 5 whenever it comes to IndyCar. So encouraging to see stuff out of Carlin. I'm a little concerned with Schmidt-Peterson.
Yeah, and I do like the look of the Carlin team. Honestly, in my mind, at least anyway, I think that both Max Chilton and Charlie Kimball are 2 of the more underrated drivers out there. I think, given the good equipment and given the chance, both these guys can really shine. They both had moments of brilliance that we've seen in the past. We've seen from Charlie moments of brain fade as well. But overall, I think it's a strong combination. Building for many years of seeing Carlin in IndyCar. So, but that being said, real quick, guys at the top of the timesheet. It doesn't surprise us at all if when we first started looking at this car, we kind of talked about how this is going to be a driver's car. It's going to be a little harder to handle. You're going to have to brake earlier. You're going to have to muscle it. And if you look at the guys at the top of the sheets there, Sato, who's got a ton of experience, Will Power, Tony Kanaan, that just goes to show that's really a driver's car that we have here. So I'm really excited for the season to begin in a couple of weeks at St. Pete.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and Marco's the one that, along with many others that have said this, is that the car, it's a little bit tougher to handle and things like that, but it's predictable. You're not, as Gabby Chavez put it, you're not just throwing a Band-Aid on it, which is more thousands of pounds of downforce. The drivers are able to actually diagnose the cars and what they're feeling. It's not about just bravery or entering a corner and wondering if it's going to stick or break loose. So it's encouraging to see that these drivers, it's predictable, it's light, it's a lot of different things for them, but overall it's something that this puts the racing back into the driver's hands. They can manage tires a little bit. They can manage a lot of different elements to a race. So it's going to be a good season, and I think, honestly, obviously talent transcends. Anytime that you've got an elite talent, they're going to be able to drive anything. Mario Andretti's and AJ Foyt's of the world were able to do that, but this also caters to guys that are more technically sound drivers. And I look at guys like Rossi, who are going to pick this up really quickly. Marco is going to kind of get his groove back. I think that's one thing to mention, is he's the last guy for Andretti Autosport to finish top 5 in the championship, and that was 2013. And that was when we had a universal aero kit. So, I think guys like him are going to do well. I think guys that were in Indy Lights driving the IL-15, their driving style is going to translate really well to this too. So it's going to be interesting to see. Newgarden tabbed 10 to 12 people that he predicts to be kind of in this championship, and we're not going to really see the stronger contenders start to rise up until after Indy. So the first part of the season is going to be a lot of fun for sure.
Absolutely. So season begins March 11th at St. Pete. Is there another test slated prior to the season opener, or the next time we see cars on the track is going to be St. Pete?
They've got there's not any open tests that I'm aware of, but they've got a lot of testing to do. I think every team has roughly 3 more test dates, maybe 4 more test dates. Ed Carpenter stayed at Phoenix one more day to test out Jordan King on the oval in Phoenix because he was so surprised at how well he'd been acclimated with the car on the road course. So they're going to try him out on the oval just to kind of get him some seat time and feel it out. But everybody else has 3 or 4 more tests before we actually see this thing kick off in St. Pete in March.
And speaking of Ed Carpenter, there's a rumored big announcement coming out of the Carpenter team within the next couple of days. It's going to involve a third car, and Danica Patrick in the Indy 500. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. Heck, that may even be announced by the time our show airs on Thursday. We are taping on Tuesday, so stay tuned for that. Now let's move on. Let's talk about real quick, Rich. One news before we start our Daytona 500 preview regarding ESPN and how they're going to cover Formula One in the United States.
Yeah, so ESPN and the ABC network that have taken over from NBCSN to cover Formula One in the US, they're not putting a team together as NBC did. They're actually taking the live feed from the British Sky TV coverage, which I think a lot of countries do, and probably it's the sort of default, de facto best coverage you're going to see of Formula One around there. And I think for the fans out there in the US especially that are watching it and will be watching the coverage, they're going to really enjoy it. There's some... it gives a different dynamic to it. It's a lot slicker than what you've seen on NBCSN in the past. And yeah, I think it's great for the sport. It's great for the coverage. And I think the fans are going to love it. And I know some of the guys on here have caught some of the coverage in the past from Sky TV. And yeah, I think that the general consensus is it's going to be really, really good.
Right. And now the first the open test for Formula One, which is that in Valencia again this year?
That's Barcelona, I believe.
Barcelona?
I think they go to Barcelona. I don't think they go to Valencia anymore, but that starts next week. So I think Thursday is the Williams unveil. I think Williams normally get out before anybody else, and I'm thinking... I know in the past few years that's been like a 3D rendered image on the F1 Racing magazine website. Could be the same again this year with it being slightly early, but I did hear a rumour that they had actually shook the car down at Mallory Park, which is a racetrack in the UK, last week, or earlier this week, sorry. So yeah, I think in the next week or two, probably by the time our next show next week, most of the top teams will have launched their cars.
All right, well, good stuff. We'll look forward to seeing the first 2018 Formula One cars on the track.
Yeah, so just to confirm, 15th is Williams, and then after that it's Red Bull on the 19th. So yeah, I'm guessing the Williams car is just going to be a rendered image, and then Red Bull on the 19th. And you've got a lot of guys 20th, 22nd, 23rd of February. They'll be the actual cars rolling out at the test.
And that's always a big deal, the Formula One reveals. That's always been, that's good stuff. So, but guys, but this weekend we've got Daytona Day coming up, as Fox has renamed it, the 60th running of the Daytona 500. Come down this week. We had pole qualifying. Young Alex Bowman took the pole, and the Clash, and Brad Keselowski took the win in the Clash. But if I've watched Daytona as long as I have, I know that those two things, winning the pole and winning the Clash, are not indicative of what we're going to see on Sunday. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Gray, and Seth, you chime in as well. Let's talk about Daytona, what we're going to see, what's new, who's where, and what we're looking at.
Well, I think the first thing that fans noticed was the new ride height rule that NASCAR has or the lack of a ride height rule that NASCAR has imposed for this year. You saw the cars down a lot further in the rear. NASCAR with the teams using softer springs and stuff in the rear. They also raised the spoiler up a half inch, so the spoiler is a half inch taller than it was last year. And you also see the car skewed a little bit different that you do. You know, people who watch the sport closely on the downforce tracks, you'll see the cars skewed a little bit to the right, where if you see a frontal shot of the car coming towards you, it looks like the right rear sticks out a little bit. The cars at Daytona are significantly skewed to the left. And what that does when the car goes into the corners and gets in a yaw condition, it gets that spoiler out of the wind stream, and it makes the car actually faster, reduces the drag. So you see a little bit of that. That's another thing that we're going to notice. And with that, the cars, the report from the drivers with the cars were a little bit twitchy. especially in the Clash. That was the first time they really got on the track with a lot of drafting and cars moving around and dealing with the wind. But I think we're going to see the cars. The drivers are going to work on that, and teams are going to work on it throughout the week, particularly starting with Thursday when we get to the Twins. Thursday night, you'll see the guys learn a little bit more for the upcoming 500. So, I don't think you can really judge what we're going to see in Sunday by what we saw in the Clash right yet. I think there's still guys gonna need some more track time with this, and they're gonna figure it out. I'm not looking for a very competitive race on Thursday night in the Twins. The teams, there's no really jockeying for positions because the field is set essentially. 40 teams showed up. 40 teams are going to start the race. And I don't see the guys going out and risking their primary car.
Well, there is points on the line.
Yeah, there are points on the line, but I don't think I think people are going to look at the big picture, and we'll kind of see what happens. I'd be surprised if we see a really dicey race in either of the Twins. I know the points, do factor in, but are they only going to pay points is it going to pay back through the field, or is only the top 10?
Top 10. It'll likely be similar to what we saw in the Clash, because in the Clash we only had 17 cars. We're going to have 20 in each duel.
Yeah. So it's, I don't know what kind of race we'll see. And I might add, too, that the pole that Alex Bowman won was the fourth consecutive for Hendrick Motorsports. Jeff Gordon won in 15, 16 and 17 was Chase Elliott, and of course Alex Bowman this year. So and the Hendrick car showed a lot of speed, single car speed. I think one thing that I did notice, I think the Roush cars, the Fords, look pretty strong in the draft. So we'll see how that goes, and that's kind of where they've been for the last several years. And, of course, Roush cars were strong in the restrictor plate races last year, too. So, but we'll talk about, as we go forward in the program, we'll talk about who we think when we give our picks for the 500, and talk about who we think are going to be the breakout teams or the strong teams in 2018.
And as you alluded to with the skew, that's because at Daytona, for the first time, the drivers have that in-car track bar adjuster at their disposal.
Yeah, that too, and then the guys are working with a little bit, because obviously you're seeing the reverse of what you see on the downforce tracks. They're wanting to get spoiler at Daytona and Talladega, and they want to get the spoiler in the air at the downforce. They'll catch on pretty quick, and they'll get these cars a little more secure before they embark on the 500.
All right, now, Richard, you just typed a comment in here about the new Ford body confirmed. I was watching the Clash. I was thinking about Keselowski's comments last year that Toyota had car, now Chevy's got the new car, and us guys at Ford have nothing. Although what I saw in the Clash was a bunch of Fords running up front. So
exactly.
So what's the word on the new Ford body?
I guess they're going to... So my understanding is that the way this works with NASCAR is they have an old Dodge body from back in, a few years ago now. And when the manufacturers develop a new shell, basically, like you've seen with this year and Toyota previously, your downforce numbers and your aero numbers have to fit within a certain window that is within a certain of these this Dodge body. Now, of course, that does also allow, the teams to be smart about how they design that body and allow areas where they can manipulate that bodywork a little bit and sort of gain a little bit of an advantage there. Now, it wouldn't surprise me if this probably isn't the last body reveal composite body like you've seen in the Xfinity series of the last year or so. That's a lot harder for the teams to manipulate and tweak on, should we say, between events. And another area where NASCAR is heavily invested in process. So in the past few years, they've had pre-qualifying and pre-race. The cars have had to go through an inspection. Now that's been notorious for teams playing games and sticking the feet underneath the car to sort of hold its ride height and all these sort of games that you can imagine going on. So they've now gone to a Hawkeye system or a visual system which measures the body location and measures far more points and far more detailed configuration of the vehicle. So not only is it faster because it's a visual system, but in theory it should be a lot more accurate. Now, obviously the teams are having to learn how to use this, and as most of them will be as well, learn how they can get an advantage using the system compared to the older system. And I think a few teams did struggle a little bit down at Daytona last week. But
McMurray.
Yeah, I think a couple of the Stuart Haas cars as well had a bit of an issue. But in a way, it's good having this extra time down at Daytona to give you a little bit more time getting through it. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago at Atlanta where only about 10 cars made it to qualifying because so many cars had issues with going through inspection. So hopefully this will make it a little bit fairer and a little bit quicker, which will certainly be an improvement. And I think one final thing we saw as well at Daytona this week was the first use of 4-man pit crews rather than the 5-man pit crew.
5-man instead of 6.
Sorry, 5 instead of 6. Well, yeah, if you include the Mm-hmm. And there's some. I didn't get a proper chance to sit down and look at it in detail, but I saw one of the cars where the jackman would, or you basically have 2 jackmen. One guy would carry the jack over, jack the car, and then he'd remove the tyre, and then the tyre carrier from the front would lower the car, and then he'd carry the jack round and then jack it on the opposite side. So there's going to be some interesting ways of getting around this, and it'll be interesting to see what times they can get to with these pit stops. It was a twofold reason I think to go to this was partly they wanted to slow down the pit stops, but also it's a cost saving because that's one less guy you've got to send to the track every week.
And
go ahead.
And on top of that, you also have the standard pit gun that all the teams are using.
Yes.
Between that and the different choreography, pit stops have slowed from about 10 seconds and change. The fastest one in the clash was Jimmy Johnson, 16.8 seconds.
Yeah, that's like 1993 pit stops.
I think you'll probably see that come down again. And also, it wouldn't surprise me again if you don't get a few shenanigans going on with those pit guns as well. Teams will work that out pretty quickly. It's a strange rule, really. I understand why they're doing it because again, they're wanting to try and reduce the cost to the teams because there's a huge amount of work went into the pit gun R&D to try and make those guns as fast as possible. But a lot of the time, it's still a human reaction and sometimes the guys couldn't actually keep up with the gun. You could make the gun so fast that the pit guys can't react to it. So I'm sure that 16 and a bit will probably come down into the 15s, maybe even seeing 14 by the end of the season.
They'll refine it, no doubt about it, and some of the techniques that they will probably use, or some of the techniques they'll at least explore or revisit, will be some of the same things that we did back in the 90s. When I first started in this sport, when I went over the wall to change tires, I carried my own tire. So I mean, some of those things will come back, and you'll see teams try different things like we did in the old days. So we'll just have to see how it goes. But another thing that the NASCAR did, they also reduced the number of people that the teams can take to the racetrack, and also the number of people that can actually work on the car. There's a number system or a patch that the crewmen will wear on their jersey, or if you want to call it jersey, or their shirt, that would designate their position with the team. And they've also reduced the number of people that actual teams can take to the track. So fewer people will be working on the car. And I'll give you an example is there's going to be a limited number of people that can actually touch the car during the race weekend. And one thing that I'll share with you is when teams would normally go to the track, and I'm going to go back to my experience at the racetrack when I worked with Bill Davis. Bill Davis was a very hands-on owner, and he would actually go under the hood and would assist the engine tuner in changing plugs or assist the team with an engine change or any number of things. And then, of course, you would have the case where teams would have to pull out a backup car. And while part of your team was taking the backup car off the trailer, there would be other guys from your sister teams or even engineers or even the car owner or team manager would be over working on the wrecked car, taking pieces off of it that you would apply. Well, those days are gone. Only the people that are designated can work on the car, so that's going to eliminate a lot of things. Also, the backup cars arrive at the racetrack without drivetrain. There's no engine, transmission, or rear gear in the car. That has to be, if the backup car has to come off the truck, all that has to be changed out from the primary car or put in at the racetrack.
Sorry, very quickly, does it have to be taken out the primary? Because I know that most teams will carry a spare engine in the hauler and a spare transmission.
I think NASCAR will have to check it. You know, as you all know, that some wrecks are so severe that the engine or components of the engine are damaged to the point where it's too risky to try to use that engine. You know, so I think that's up to NASCAR's discretion whether you can, you know, bring the spare engine out of the transporter and install it. But that does not that's not a good rule the way I see it. I don't like it. You know, NASCAR's starting all these other initiatives where they want to practice and they want to qualify the same day as the race. You remember the Pocono and Martinsville races from last year, and that's going to create a problem, particularly on the same day stuff. If you have a car in the last round of qualifying, if the guy backs the car into the fence and you have to roll out the backup car, that's a lot of work to do in a 2.5 hour time frame to put an engine, transmission, rear gear in the car, set it up, inspect it, get it ready for the race. I don't know how they can do it.
And I think,
particularly they're giving you less people to do it with.
Yeah,
more work with less people. Yeah, it's something doesn't add up.
I think one of the ideas, obviously, with this is to save money for the smaller teams, which is, you know, totally understandable. But if you're a smaller team and you don't have the resources to employ people to swap an engine out, you know, in a couple of hours, or swap a complete, drivetrain system out in a couple of hours, and you can't make the race, then what sort of penalties do you have from your sponsors for not making a race compared to the cost of the extra engine? I think they've got to. I think cost saving is good, but I think they've got to, you know, use a little bit of smart about it every now and again.
But But you talk about the cost savings. It's the team owners that ask for this. NASCAR is having to bite the bullet when people look at these rule changes and they look at it's as a NASCAR initiative. But really, it's the team owners that ask for this, and that's the complete body of team owners, the large team owners and the smaller team owners. And in some cases, a lot of your smaller teams, they still go to the racetrack with essentially a lot of volunteer crewmen too, and have done that. So I don't think manpower in the past was a problem for the smaller teams, because they would always have guys that would come in and be able to help it. But I think NASCAR, in response to what the owners wanted, are looking at these initiatives, and they're the ones that are driving the sport right now with these changes.
And speaking of engines, at Daytona we have a one-engine rule for the Cup Series this year. In past years, after the duels, teams could go and change their engine. This year, they have to keep the same engine throughout all the speed weeks, excluding the Clash.
Yeah.
And if they were to blow their engine or change their engine for whatever reason, not only do they go to the back in their duel, Not only do they go to the back in the Daytona 500, they go to the back of the field at Atlanta as well. This is meant to prevent drivers from dumping the clutch.
Yeah, and I'll give you my thought on that in a second. But yeah, that's.
And to answer your question, Richard, the one run Talladega last year.
Okay, I knew there was some. I knew that the engines from Talladega were sort of sealed post race,
and there will be 13 engines that are sealed this year, meant to run 2 races each for a total of 26 races.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is another cost-cutting initiative that NASCAR has.
Yeah, and that again was brought about by request by the owners. The owners wanted to reduce cost as well. But I tell you what, in this day and time, and in NASCAR like it is, an engine penalty like that starting at the rear is not. We saw it all last year. The good teams, you take the 18, the 42, and some of the other guys. Starting at the rear is not that big a hand. They're going to slice through half the field like a hot knife through butter anyway. And with the stage system like it is, they're gonna recover a lot of that thing. So I really think in some instances it's not that big. They're going to look at it, but I don't know that the punishment for having to change engine is going to be that great for some teams. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, and if I may real quick, just in the truck series, we now have the Ilmore spec engine. NASCAR is apparently allowing teams to run an optional spec engine, the ARCA Ilmore engine, which is about 10 horsepower less than the engine that most teams will have, which just for one team, for example, Jennifer Joe Cobb's team, last year they were on average 70 to 80 horsepower less than the big teams. This year, with the ARCA engine, they'll be somewhere between 5 and 15 less on average.
And I think that's another coming trend that we're going to see invade a lot of other forms of motorsports as we go forward. We're going to see more spec engines, and of course, it's like we talked about. Richard touched on a little bit ago. The composite bodies are coming. We'll probably see the Cup Series experiment with some of that next year, and I would say by 2020 we'll be seeing composite bodies in all 3 major series.
It wouldn't be too surprising.
No, so with that being said, let's talk about the race Sunday. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left in the show, so let's talk about who we like for the race. Obviously we haven't seen the duels yet, so we're going on what we've seen in the Clash, or we're going on past performance. So let's start with you, Joey. Since you've been quiet through this whole segment, who do you like for Daytona?
If I'm going to be a betting man, I don't remember the last time a series champion went on to win Daytona off the top of my head. That said, I don't want to go that route, even though my heart's telling me to. I'm going to go with Paul Menard, actually. So I think he's always a solid restrictor plate racer. I look at what Ford's done. Even with the new body, they still ended up doing pretty well in the Clash. So, and honestly, I like the combination of Paul Menard and Wood Brothers. I see more on social media, which is honestly very scary. And I think the program in general is going to be really good with him. So he's on a good team, and not that he necessarily wasn't before, but he's on one that has a lot more going for it as of late. So I think Paul Menard's going to do good.
All right, so Richard and Gray, you guys both know Paul pretty well. So what are your thoughts on Paul Menard and his chances in the 500?
He's basically in a pen.
Yeah, more or less, yeah.
It just rolls out of a different door at the shop. As you say, he's a good restrictor plate racer. He's very solid. He's always, in the top 10 with a couple of laps to go. He's never a million miles away from those. And maybe in the past, he hasn't quite put himself in the right positions. And dare I say, hasn't had teammates around him to work with him. So, It'll be interesting to see what it's like, because you imagine if he's thereabouts, Ryan Blaney, Joe Logano, Brad Keselowski, one or two of those guys are going to be in the mix as well. And it'll be interesting to see how they all work together because, in all fairness, at RCR, he hasn't had teammates around him to be in the mix. I mean, Newman has a habit of going to sit at the back of the pack and keep out of trouble, and Austin, he could be up there sometimes, but you wouldn't. I think probably his best chance at one of the restrictor plates this year of ending that wind drought, which probably is one of the longest active wind droughts in NASCAR, isn't it, at the moment?
Yeah, he won it the Brickyard 400.
Yeah, was that No, it wasn't 14. Was it 12, 11? 11.
If he wins, though, he ends up with like a similar career mark as Jamie McMurray, who, he wins all the crown jewels, but isn't quite, there at the end with all the races.
Well,
when you retire, you look at the trophies on the mantelpiece, don't you?
That's right.
Yeah.
Paul Menard is a curious character to me, and based on what I've seen, restrictor plate racing is a different type of racing, and we've seen the surprise winner come through there, and basically it's positioning, being in the right place at the right time, dodging the big wreck, and crazy. We've all seen crazy things happen at the end of these plate races. He could win that, and I tell you, there's a lot of people that have one win in NASCAR, and that win come at a restrictor plate race. Paul's only NASCAR win is at the Brickyard 400, which was a fuel mileage win. So somewhat fluky in that thing. He had his car in position to win. They took advantage of it, and he was able to come home with the winner. But aside from that, his career has been less than sterling.
I tell you why I like Paul Menard though over the other Penske's, and that's because Brad Keselowski's already got his out of the way, and you don't really go through Daytona anymore and go on the Dale Jr. I'm gonna try to sweep speed weeks role anymore. So,
but. Didn't Denny Hamlin do that in 2016?
Yeah.
I guess, but honestly, it's a rarity. I mean, come on.
I'm gonna state this. I think right now, when you look at the best plate racers that have a knack for it, you would have to put Keselowski at the top of that list. His record is there. He put himself in position to win the Clash. I didn't see where he was going to. We'll have to look at this aero package that they've got right now to see whether cars can double team, or if the draft is going to work the way you can slingshot. Just don't know. We'll see how it comes out the rest of the weekend and some of the practice and some of the races. But I think Keselowski, he's a former champion. He's won it. He's won everything but the Daytona 500. I think he could do it. The Ford package is very good there, and I'm gonna go with Keselowski as my pick to win the race, because I think basically he understands the draft, knows how he's proven it time and time again. So it may be his turn to win the Daytona 500 this year.
Absolutely, yeah. So now, Richard, you've got a pick for race then?
I don't think you can look too far past one of the Ford cars. I mean, I know there's the whole body thing, but I really don't think. I think they look like the real deal, and I'm going to go.
I know you second that one.
I just said that I was picking Paul Menard. No?
I know, but you say you second. You're a Kevin Hart fan. Seth, your pick is.
I'm going with Bubba Wallace, and I just want to see someone with that kind of personality end up in victory lane. And just to top it all off, they're also going to be chronicling that in a new documentary series on Facebook.
In a wall at some point.
That would be a spectacular story. The only bigger story than that would be if Danica wins it. But I'm going to go with, I was really thinking Ryan Blaney. Arts color on that car. That car just looked spectacular during the clash. But as I saw him, his inexperience get him shuffled right on. I'm going to go with the Ford also, but I'm going to go with Joey Logano for the 500, take his second 500 win. So.
Winning the Daytona 500 last year.
Yes, he was.
So, and I experienced for aggression, for inexperience, because you've got to get out and sometimes you've got to try to make things happen. And Ryan has shown that he's willing to do that. He's not going to stay in line, and he's going to shake things up. And it's bit him a couple of times. But one of these days, he's going to make that right move. Somebody's going to tuck out with him, and they may go to the front. I think last year showed what he could do. Had his car not sputtered, he would probably have driven around the 41 between 3 and 4 in the start finish line. But his car, he sputtered coming off 4, and he lost his momentum. So we'll see. Blaney would be a good pick too.
I'll implore Frank to change his pick, because at least Blaney is actually trying to do things before we get to the big dance on Sunday.
Yeah.
I can't say that about everybody else. Too many people become follow the leader, just stick to the bottom line, the yellow line there, and at least he's trying to learn what he can't do, because you've also got to learn how the draft is with the Fords off of the Chevrolet bodies and off of different things like that. So at least he's testing the waters.
And Seth brought up a good point too about personality. Ryan's another one of these young kids that's got an awful lot of personality, and he shows it. And both he and Bubba have similar personalities. But, to a degree, I'm looking forward to this year with those two guys bringing in sort of a breath of fresh air to the sport.
All right, good stuff, guys. You know what? I am going to take your advice. I'm going to change my pick to Ryan Blaney and hope that he does me well in Daytona 500. And we'll all be watching that Sunday. We'll be back on next week. I want to thank the Whoobazoo Radio Network. I want to thank iHeartRadio for hosting us. I want to thank you, Seth, Joey, Gray, Richard. I want to thank all you folks that listen in. Everybody, have a good night. We'll talk to you in a week.
Whoobazoo.com